Sister Cletra?
Yes, sir.
Are you there?
Yes, sir, I am there.
Okay. Thank you. Sister?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you can start.
Yeah. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Sister Clarita. I'm working as a nursing superintendent in Mother Teresa Hospital, Panna. Next slides, please. No, first one. Actually, today's case presentation is communication 2. Patient details is a female patient, 56 years old. Diagnosis is a cancer left breast, presented enlarged fungating mass over left chest region, along and pain left upper limb edema, and bedsores third stage. And present complaints: severe pain in a left hand, swelling in the left hand and the left leg, difficulty in sleeping, and history of illness: severe pain and swelling, and had increased in size, mastectomy done on the left side breast. She was asked to do various investigations, including CT scan of chest and left hand and the left legs, followed by a 6 cycle of chemotherapy. On examination, the temperature was 35.8 degrees Celsius, BP 140 by 90, and pulse 88, respiration rate 18 for breaths minute. Saturation was normal 99%, CSN oriented to time, place, and person. And treatment and significant investigations like CT scan, chest and left hand and the left legs, mastectomy, and chemotherapy. And psychological aspects: she had fear of diagnosis of cancer, had no ideas about her condition. Functions: she is not able to walk, and she had a pain, so could not sleep well. And expectations was wants to be given treatment and wants to know her disease condition. But her family members are fear to say real or disease condition like cancer and disease prognosis. On medications, she was on syrup morphine 5 mg for hourly, syrup lactulose night daily, tab PCM 1 gram, tab amlodipine 5 mg for 1 week. Main concerns was done surgery privacy, find out whom the patient wants to be present, family, her daughter, and pain, nutrition, emotional distress of the patient and sitter, difficulty in sleeping, lymphedema. And summary was the patient diagnosed CA left breast, presented enlarged fungating mass over left chest region, along and pain left upper limb, lymphedema, and bed sores third stage on sacrum. She is admitted with the complaints of severe pain, swelling on limbs, and lack of sleep at night. Mastectomy done and 6 cycle of chemotherapy finished. She is for support, suppurative care, consultant, social worker. They helped him to expert from here as for now. Psychologist consulted for emotional support, spiritual support through virtual from our institution. Discussion points. My question is how to give emotional support to patient family, how we could support patient daughter. Very hard to listen to it. Like her daughter told me, how can I lose my mom? Without her, I'm going to be alone. My other family are not like mom. Any similar story from your side about how we breaking bad news and how we could dealing with conclusion? Thank you.
Biju sir?
Maybe we can go on to the presentation, and in the end, we can take questions. Meanwhile, the participants can what do you call, put the questions or comments on the chat box, and you can collate all of that in the end, and maybe we can have a discussion. And Sister Clarita, thank you for that excellent presentation. A lot of important points you have brought forth, and maybe the presentation that I'm going to make will give answers to some of your questions, but then we will have a discussion at the end of it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your presentation. So
Welcome, sir.
can we, thank you. So can we have the PPT, please?
Sir, yes, sir. We can start, sir.
Can you share,
Sir,
start
can,
sharing?
sir, can you able to see the screen, sir?
Uh,
I already started sharing.
no, I can't see. Okay, now I can see. Right,
Okay, sir.
right. Oh. So this is part 2. Can we have the next slide, please? Right. So today we are going to talk about communicating bad news, managing collusion, and these are the two things which came up in the last slide that Sister Clarita had brought. How can we break bad news and how can we manage collusion? And we will be covering that today. And another thing that we will be covering, which is not part of the question of the presentation, is how we are going to deal with the angry person. So next slide. So when we talk about communicating bad news, historically and across the world, people have been taking one of these two positions. Either there is the thought that the patient should be told everything. So that is called a full disclosure model. This was practiced in many countries, especially in the Western countries, where you have to take the permission of the patient to talk to the family. You cannot talk to the family directly. So naturally, you will be telling the patient everything, the truth, the bitter truth, and if the patient permits you, you can then talk to the family. However, in our part of the world, we generally do not disclose bad news to the patient. We talk to the family first. And if the family agrees, then we may talk to the patient. Most of the time, we don't tell the bad news to the patient. So that is a non-disclosure model. This must be more familiar to you because it is how most of the Eastern countries, India including, this is how we practice. Now the problem with these two models is, in the first model, full disclosure model, where they practice telling the full truth to the patient, what if a patient does not want to know? So that becomes a conflict between the patient's right not to know. And in the model that we practice, non-disclosure model, where we do not tell the patient, what if the patient wants to know? Then we are violating the patient's right to know. So that is the problem with these two models, that they can be in conflict. Next slide. They can be in conflict with the patient's right to know and the patient's right to not know. Hence, both the models are problematic. So what can we do about it? We have to find an alternative model. Next slide. Next slide. So the alternative model is individualized disclosure model. That means you create a model for the individual sitting in front of you. So individual to individual, the model will change. There are some basic principles which will not change, but how you tailor make a solution will be for the individual. You cannot have one model for everybody. Now, how do we deal with that? We will explain. Next slide. First of all, we have to decide who should communicate bad news. Many times people think only the doctor should communicate bad news, which is not true. The person who should be communicating bad news should have three things in his or her favor. One, the communicator should have the trust of the patient. If you are a doctor or a nurse, but the patient does not trust you, then perhaps you are not the right person. His or her family member or a relative or a very close friend. But as doctors and nurses, we have to make an effort to earn the trust of the patient. The next important thing is that we should have information. Now, mind you, the information, you may say that the medical people will have the information, but we do not want medical jargon. Simple information. What is the disease? It's a cancer. And what is the situation? It is incurable because it is advanced. What are the options? We do not have disease treatment options, but we have options to provide you comfort for us as long as it is needed. So this is the information that you need to have. You don't need to have whether it's a small scale lung cancer in grade 3A or 4B or whatever. That is not necessary. That is irrelevant information to the patient or for the matter to any common person, any non-medical person. It is irrelevant. All that they need to know is in simple words, what is the disease, what can be done about it, what cannot be done about it in simple words. And then the third part, skill, the skill to communicate bad news. Now, this is something that we all have to learn. Going back to the, can you go back a slide? So if we are the right person to communicate bad news, we have the trust of the patient, we have the information, and then we have the skill, then we are the right person to communicate bad news to the patient in the individualized disclosure model. What that means is you have to figure out whether the person sitting in front wants to know or does not want to know. That's the first thing. And once you have figured out that the person does not want to know, you do not proceed with communicating bad news. You provide whatever care the person needs and you send the person away. And of course, you will be reviewing the person, seeing the person. However, if you have figured out that the person wants to know the bad news, only then you will proceed. And when you proceed, you will give only the optimum amount of information. You will not give less information. You will not give more information. You will give only as much information as the patient wants, because that is what the patient needs. If you give less information, patient will not be satisfied. If you give more information, maybe the patient may not be able to bear it. Now that is again the skill. The two important things about individualized disclosure model is first find out who wants to know, who does not want to know. And those who do want to know, you give only as much as they That is the challenge of individualized disclosure model. Next slide. Next slide. So before we go on to how to communicate bad news, let us discuss why to communicate bad news. Why should we communicate? First and foremost, if you know that you have limited time in your hand, then perhaps you will think of what are the important things I need to do before I go. For example, you may consider making settling all the claims, all the financial issues, property. In short, you may make a will that after my time, all that I have should be distributed among so and so people. Or you may consider how you want to be treated. I don't want to be shifted to ICU where if I'm terminally ill. That is something that you can say, tell your loved ones, and you can put it in writing or tell your doctor. So these are the things. Plus, if there are things that you always wanted to do but never got time to do, you may, if your body permits and your mind permits, you may. For example, you wanted to meet a long lost friend and you have not seen the person for many years and you want to meet the person in person. So maybe you can make an effort to do that, or maybe you can ask the person to come over. If it is a place you wanted to visit, maybe it's a holy place, maybe it's a place of interest, maybe it is something that you always wanted to do, or something that you wanted to taste, or something, anything. It is kind of a bucket list, the things to do before I die. So you get a chance to do, but that will happen only if you know that you have limited time on your hand. So there are a lot of things that can be done. The earlier you know, the better, because then you are in a better frame of mind and better physically to do the things that you want to do, finish whatever you want to finish before you die. You get a chance to finish all of that. You also get a clarity on what is possible and what is not possible, and hence you will not jump from hospital to hospital. You will stop going to this doctor and that doctor looking for cures which does not exist. And that is called hospital hopping and doctor shopping. Those who are not aware, even if maybe a relative has been told that there is nothing more to be done, if the patient does not know and close family member does not know, then they will keep on moving from one hospital to the other because they go to a new hospital with a lot of hope, but then their hopes is broken because they are not getting better, but nobody told them that you cannot get better. So they go from one place to another and then to spend all their money in a futile exercise, and then they have to sell off their house, they have to sell off their jewelry, they have to sell off their cow, they have to sell off everything. In the end, the patient dies and the family is on the road. The children's education suffers because they no longer can go to hospital, sorry, schools and colleges. So whole generation is ruined, and many families are pushed into poverty because of this. And why? Because nobody told them the truth. The third point is the barrier between the patient and family. Many a times the patient does not know, but the family knows. In some rare cases, the patient knows, but the family does not know. But whatever be the case, the person who knows now has to act in front of the patient as if everything is normal. So they have to hide their real emotions. And many times they may go to another room and cry, or they may go to the neighbor's house and cry, or they may come to the hospital to the doctor's room and they cry there because they can't cry in front of the patient. Now, this is precious moments which are being wasted. If both the patient and family were to know, they will get a chance to cry and hug together. And that is the precious thing, because when somebody is terminally ill, the worst thing to do is to act in front of that person, because you cannot open your heart and tell the person, I love you, I miss you so much. And the patient also does not get a chance to say, I love you, and how much I care for you. And there are so many things. The relationship needs to be strengthened, especially when life is very little of it is left. But most of the time we see a lot of drama being played in the house. And once the patient passes away, then looking at the photo and wishing only if I could tell how much I love you, that time is lost. So when this could have been possible when the person was alive, that time we play and we do acting and we do a drama, and then it's a wasted opportunity. And in palliative care, we talk about total care, physical care, providing physical comfort, emotional care, peace of mind. How can you provide peace of mind without starting with the patient? Until and unless, because initially when you tell the truth, there will be an emotional sadness, there'll be crying, there will be sometimes even anger. But after some time, when those emotions settle down, then the person can think, okay, now this is the situation. Now I have to think of what I need to do. And all of these things that we talk about, the closure of life business, hospital hopping, doctor shopping, barrier, emotion, all of that can be taken care of. So we can provide total care, physical relief we can provide with medicine, but without being honest with the patient, without being honest with the patient, of course it will hurt in the beginning, but without being honest with the patient, we can never ever achieve peace of mind. But after being honest with the patient, with the skills that you learn, we can achieve peace of mind. Next slide, please. So when we talk about how to communicate bad news all over the world, there is we are talking about individualized disclosure model. There is a protocol, a standard operating procedure. This is called a spikes protocol. So spikes stands for setting up the interview. So during last session we talked about how to do an interview, uh, and we have to create the right kind of environment. For example, in my practice, evening time I keep aside for uh, what do you call serious communications, because in the late evening my OP area is usually silent. Most of the people would have left, and it's quiet, and that is the right kind of atmosphere I'm looking for. So most of the time when I have to do some serious communications, I prefer uh, evening time in the OP. And in my OP area, I have some kept some tissues, because there will be some crying, so I can hand over tissue when needed. And always there's a little bit of water to drink, so in case somebody wants water. So that kind of few simple things, arrangements is always there before we start a serious communication. P stands for perception. We try to find out what does the patient understand about what is going on. We also call it insight. Then I for invitation. We ask the patient's permission, or we take the we discuss with it, and we take obtain the patient's invitation to now that is on how whether we should proceed to communicate bad news or not. K stands for knowledge, that is honest sharing of information. And E stands for emotion. We have to account for emotions and how we will deal with it. And S stands for strategy, that is planning, and summarizing, that is how we are going to finish the interview. So let us do it. Let us learn the spikes protocol. So communication bad news is like any surgical procedure. It is a procedure. So there is a indication for communicating bad news. The indication we talked about, why it is important to communicate bad news. And the another indication is the patient wants to know. And then we have the standard operating procedure step by step. And once the communicating bad news is done, we have a expected outcome. So just like any surgical procedure, there's indication, step by step procedure, and after the surgery is over, we have an expected outcome. Next slide, please. So pre-procedure preparation, update yourself on the patient's medical condition, go through the file. Even if you are very familiar with the patient, there is no harm going through the file before you are calling in the patient for communicating that. As I said, dedicated time for it. You can't do it in a rush way. Remember, it is like a surgical procedure. You have to keep aside a time for it. It is like an elective procedure in communication. And set the environment and use active listening skills. I already told you about how I set the environment. I keep aside a specific time of the day, late evening. I have some water and some tissues in the room in case the patient may need it. Next slide, please. So how do we start the interview? We start by taking the patient's history, or if you already know the history, then no need to start from the beginning. Then get the patient's insight and concern. Ask them, what do you think is going on? And concerns. What are you most concerned about? What are you most worried about? So they'll tell you what they understand, and they will tell you what their concerns. Explore if the patient wants to know. So if you tell the patient, okay, do you want to know more about your disease? Most likely the patient will say yes. However, that is not good enough. You have to give a warning shot. Warning shot is very important because when you give a warning shot, it tells the patient that something serious is going to be discussed. So that gives the patient a chance to back out if the patient does not really want to hear it. However, if the patient really wants to hear it, the person will look into your eyes and says, yes, I want to know. In the next slide, you're going to see a example of a warning shot. Would you still want to know? So this warning shot has two components. If it is something serious, and the second component is a question. Would you still want to know? In Hindi, I may say, अगर बात कुछ सीरियस है तो क्या आप फिर भी जानना चाहेंगे? In Malayalam, I would say, കാര്യം ഇത്തിരി സീരിയസ് ആണെങ്കിലും അറിയണമെന്നുണ്ടോ? So this, I only know the English, Hindi and Malayalam. So I'm sorry, I can't speak in other languages. But generally, I just want you to understand that the warning shot is in two parts. First part is if it is something serious. The second part is would you still want to know? And when you give a warning shot, that time the patient realizes that what the doctor is going to probably say next may be something very, very uncomfortable. So that point, if the patient is not mentally prepared to hear it, the person may not make eye contact, may not look at your face. Then you can realize that the person does not want to know. Or the patient may make an excuse. The patient says, oh, you give me the medicines, I will come after 1 week or something. That also tells you the person does not want to know. Or the patient may directly tell you, no, I don't want to know. You tell it to my children or you tell it to my spouse, whatever. So then also you know that the person does not want to know. Do not proceed with communicating bad news to such a patient. Next slide. Only if the person looks into your eyes and says, I want to know, only then you proceed. And how are you going to proceed? You are going to tell the patient's story from the beginning, and that storytelling approach is called a narrative approach. If the patient confirms a desire to know, adopt a narrative approach. Next slide. So what is this narrative approach? It is narrating the story of the patient to the patient from the beginning. For example, if the patient has given you a story that I had some weight loss and cough for about 1 month ago. I went to the local doctor, and the local doctor gave me some medicines for 1 week and told me if I don't get better to come back. I did not get better, so I went back to the doctor, and the doctor asked me to get a chest X-ray. The chest X-ray was done, and then after seeing the chest X-ray, he said, I'm going to give you a letter. You go to the city hospital. There they will take care of you. So I took this letter and went to the city hospital. And in the city hospital, they asked me to, first of all, many doctors came and checked me. And then they asked me to get a scan done of my chest. And after the scan report came, then they mm, then they discussed and they told me there's a swelling neck and they want to do an injection test. And I don't know what that is. Anyway, they did this injection test on my neck, and after then they discharged me. And then after 1 week, they asked me to come back because the report will come only after 1 week. And then they, after 1 week, when I went back, they told me the report has come, and they told me something. I don't know what it is. They said something in English, so I'm a poor person. I don't know. And then and meet you. That is why I'm here. So if that is the story your patient tells, then you need to find out what is the patient understands. So for patients to understand, what is the patient understanding? This is the story that the patient has told you. And the reference letter tells you this patient has non-small cell lung cancer, multiple metastasis, not fit for stage 4, not fit for any oncological intervention. Kindly see for supportive care. If that is two stories now. One is the medical story, which you have from the reference letter. The second is the patient's story, which the patient just told you. And then there's a third story, which is the patient's insight. And the patient's insight goes like that. You have to dig for more information. So while the patient is narrating the story, so I had 1 month ago, I had weight loss and cough. I went to the local doctor. He gave me medicines for 1 week. And then he asked me to come back if I did not get better. So I did not get better, so I went back. And then he asked me to get a chest X-ray. At that point of time, I would ask, so why did I don't know. The patient doctor said to get an X-ray. That's why I got an X-ray. Okay. And then what happened? He looked at X-ray and then he gave me a letter to go to the city hospital. And so what was there in the chest X-ray? Doctor did not tell me what was there in the chest X-ray, but he gave me the letter to go to the city hospital. So why did he give you the letter to city hospital? He told me that further treatment is over there. Okay, then what happened in the city hospital? Many doctors came to see me, and then there was this. They asked me to get a CT scan done. Why did they tell you to CT scan to get a CT scan? Well, they said I need a CT scan. That's why I didn't ask why they want a CT scan. Okay, then what happened? The CT scan report came. Okay, what was there in the report? I don't know. They said something in English I did not understand. And then what happened? Then they said that there is a swelling in my neck, and then they want to do a injection test. Okay. So what was there in the swelling? Did they tell you why they want to do an injection test? No, no, they said that there is, I don't know why, I didn't even know that there was a swelling in the neck. Anyway, they found the swelling and then they said they want an injection test. Okay. So then what happened? Once they sent me home, and after 1 week when I went back, the report came and then they asked me to come and meet you. So what was there in the report of the injection test? I don't know. I'm a poor man. I don't understand English. They said something. So anyway, I'm here. So now this is the third story. You now understand where are the gaps in the patient's understanding of the reality. And now, when you are narrating the story of the patient to the patient, you fill in the gaps by providing chunks of information. For example, so while you're telling the story of the patient, 1 month ago you had weight loss and cough, you went to the local doctor and he gave you some medicine. And then after 1 week you did had no improvement, you went back and then he asked you to get an X-ray. The X-ray showed something like a shadow. So you are giving a small chunk of information. And if the patient is continuing to make eye contact, you continue the story. And now you are going to escalate the information. The X-ray showed something like a shadow, and to find out what the shadow was, he referred you to the city hospital. So something like a shadow becomes a shadow. I'll again repeat. The X-ray showed something like a shadow, and to find out what the shadow was, he referred you to the city hospital. Next slide. And in the city hospital, they did a scan. They found something like a tumor. And to find out what this tumor was, they tried to do a biopsy. That is the injection test you find out. To find out if it was something like a cancer. So, so this is how you gradually escalate information. Something like a shadow becomes a shadow. Shadow becomes something like a tumor. Something like a tumor becomes a tumor. Tumor becomes something like a cancer. So at all the points where you are giving new information, you focus on the patient's body language. If the patient continues to make eye contact, you continue the story. At any point of time, if the patient breaks eye contact, you pause the story. A patient may break eye contact for two reasons. One, the patient is trying to digest the new information, and everybody needs some time to digest new information. So you have to pause the story, you just wait in silence and see. Often the patient, after digesting the new information, will again make eye contact. That means the patient now wants to know more. Then you can continue the story. However, if the eye contact is broken, the patient is not looking in your face, is looking down, and it becomes uncomfortably prolonged, then you can ask the person, should I continue? If the patient then looks up to your face and then says yes, then you can continue. If the patient does not look up, does not make eye contact, that means maybe the patient had enough. So you stop the storytelling at that point of time. So this is how you find out whether the patient had enough of information or not. So as much as the patient wants, you give the information. It is possible that the patient may listen to the full story. It's possible that the patient may listen till story or half the story. But wherever the patient wants to stop, you stop. That means communicating bad news is patient led. You are only facilitating sharing of information. You are not going to decide how much to share. It's a patient who is going to decide how much information he or she wants to hear. And we find that out by how the body language of the patient what the patient's body language is telling. Next slide. So once the patient has either the full information or enough information for the time being. You stop there. At this point of time, be prepared for an emotional reaction, because this is not what the patient knew. This is a new information. So the emotional reaction is bound to come. The reaction may be in the in the form of tears, or it can even be in the form of anger, or sometimes it can be stunned silence. Whatever be it, be prepared for an emotional reaction. And what can you do when you are confronted with an emotional reaction? Next slide. What can you do? Next slide, please. Don't do anything. Just be there with the patient. Don't do anything. Just be there with the patient. Allow the patient to ventilate emotion. Allow the patient to ventilate emotion. It can be anger, it can be tears, or it can be sadness. It is like inside during the surgery, if there is an artery is bleeding, the surgeon puts in packs and put pressure on that area, and you have to wait till the bleeding stops. It is something like that. Right now, the tears are there. You have to wait for the patient to finish the emotion. Don't do something. Don't say don't cry or etc. etc. because you have to allow ventilation of emotion. Because until and unless emotions are ventilated, you cannot go to the next step of discussing rationally. If the emotions are high, you cannot have a rational discussion about what is to be done next. For a rational discussion, you have to first allow the emotions to be ventilated, the emotions to be calmed down. Only then can you proceed. For that, you have to wait and be with the patient. Don't say something, don't do something. Just be there. At this point of time, I may offer the tissue, or I will not force it onto them. I will just place it in front of them, that they have the choice to either take the tissue and the glass of water, or one of them, or not to take it. It is their choice. But I'll put it in front of them. I will not hand it in their hands, because then that will be forcing, that will be doing something that interrupts their flow of emotion. So do not interrupt the flow of emotion, allow it to flow. Now, as healthcare providers, we are not trained to do that. And many of the time, that is the most difficult thing that we find. Not doing something, not saying something, just being there. It's a very difficult thing for us to do because we are not trained to do that. But that is what is needed at this point of time. Next slide, please. And then once the emotional reaction has subsided, then we can talk about what can be done, what cannot be done, and all the options in front of us. Give honest answers. And if you don't have an answer, say, I don't know, but I'll try to find out, or I'll send you to somebody who may know an answer to that. I'll refer you to somebody who knows more about this situation. So be honest, right? Honest doesn't mean I don't know and full stop. Honest means I don't know. I'll try to find out, or I'll send you to somebody. You don't just abandon the patient by being honest. I don't know, and that's about it. I mean, that's never like that. I don't know, but I'll try to find out. I'll help you out, or I don't know, but I'll send you to somebody who knows about these kind of things. See, there's always a guiding to the patient, guidance to the patient, even if you don't know. But we have to be honest if you don't know something. Or if you know something, you share that information or that solution or whatever that options are honestly. Don't lie to patient. Next slide. And always give achievable hope. Never give false hopes. That is the worst thing you can do to a human. And once you have discussed what are the plans, give a clarity on when you are going to do, what they are going to do, when they are supposed to come back, what investigation needs to be done, or what all is not required anymore. All of that you have to give clear decision. And it's also important to involve the patient and the family in participating in making the decisions. So this is a decision by consensus or participatory decision making. Next slide, please. If they have any doubts or clarification, give them an opportunity to ask. As I always say, before I close the interview, I always ask, is there anything else that you need to ask? Is there anything else that you want to say? If this then you can close the interview and give them and leave the door open. That means you give them some kind of a contact number. If you don't want to give your private number, don't give your private mobile number, but give them some contact number in case they want to contact you or any member of your team. Next slide. Post-procedure follow-up. If the patient has been counseled or communicated bad news in the OP, please arrange for somebody to call them up later in the day once they have reached home, just to find out how things are. If this patient is IP, then either you can go and see the person before you leave the hospital, or you can arrange one of your team members to go and meet the patient in case they have some questions or just to see how they are doing. It's just like a surgeon will take a post-surgery rounds late evening just to see how the patients are doing. Next slide, please. Okay, so can we go back? So this is where we are stopping with communicating bad news. The next topic would be collusion. In case you have any questions or comments on communicating bad news that we just did, please put it up in the chat box and we will take it up at the end of the session. So coming to the next topic, which is collusion. Collusion is essentially a conspiracy of silence. Most of the time, you may have noticed that the family member comes over and says, patient. So the family member is trying to collude with us in preventing the patient from being aware of information. And why are they doing this? Because they are trying to protect their loved one. The family is trying to protect the patient from harm. And where is the harm? The harm is in getting the bad from us. So they are trying to protect the patient from us. You can't blame the family because they think that we may knowingly or unknowingly tell the bad news to the patient. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So most important thing to do is to understand that apart from the patient, the family is also suffering. They're suffering from fear and anxiety about what will happen if the patient comes to know. So remember, in palliative care, we talk about taking care of patient and family. So now it is important to focus on the family by acknowledging that the family also is suffering. They are fearful, they are anxious. So as medical professionals, most of the time our focus is only on the patient. In palliative care, we emphasize that we have to focus on the family also. So in collusion, we acknowledge that the family is trying to collude because they are afraid, they are anxious. Next slide. The important thing to do is do not challenge the family's belief. From your point of view, you may understand that communicating bad news is not such a bad thing. In fact, it is very important, and you do it only to those patients who want to know, who really want to know, not for everybody. You may know all of that, but the family does not know any of that. They may think that the moment you tell bad news, the patient is going to die. That is their belief. If you say no, 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 this is not like that, and get more anxious. They think that we are somehow trying to make an trying to, you know, tell the bad news to the patient. That is why we are trying to convince them, and they are only going to get more afraid and more anxious. That is why it is very important not to challenge the family's belief. Don't say no, no, no. Your belief is not it right. You're somebody is making fools of you. So do not challenge. Next slide. You need to do is you have to agree to collude. The family says, please do not tell it to the patient. You can say, okay, no problem. In fact, I also add, what have you told the patient? And then they will say, we have he's got an ulcer. They may tell whatever they have told, whatever lies they have told the patient. And then I would say, okay, is it okay if I also say the same thing? So now their anxiety is considerably down, because now they now realize that this person to whom they came to beg not to tell the patient is totally agreeing with them. So their anxiety comes down a lot. So now you're trying to palliate the anxiety of the family. And this is a very important thing. Cannot reach the patient without the family's support. If you try to do, you will be in trouble, because the family will respond against you. So it is very important to have the family on your side. And the first step to do that is to agree with what the family wants. Next slide. And work with the family. So once you have taken care of their anxiety by agreeing to collude, then the next step is to earn their trust. And there are few things that you can do. First of all, listen to them. Listen to whatever concerns they have, whatever their story, listen to them, because that is a very important tool to earn the trust. And the next important thing to do is to make the patient comfortable. You talk to the patient, and if you're a doctor, you give medicines to take care of pain, breathlessness, restlessness, whatever. So if the patient is comfortable, and if you're a nurse, you can do a lot of nursing techniques to provide physical comfort to the patient, positioning, repositioning, pillows, and massaging, all sorts of. There are much more effective ways of managing physical discomfort by nursing techniques than by pharmacological techniques. So when you provide comfort to the patient, which is of the utmost concern to the family, and they see that you're making that effort to get their loved one comfortable, then also their trust in you increases. So, two important things: listen to them, empathize with them, do not contradict them, and make the patient comfortable. And once the patient's family starts trusting you, then they will start listening to you. And once you have reached that point, next slide, then you talk to them uh, about hospital hopping and doctor shopping, and the so much of financial problems and emotional problems associated with it, and the importance of giving a chance to the patient to finish whatever is important to him or her in their life before physically and mentally they deteriorate and it can't be done. It's also a good time to emphasize on the importance of using the precious time that they have with the patient in an honest way, thereby trying to remove the barrier between the patient and family. And in this way, you can also provide total care. All of these points should come once you have the trust of the family. And good communication skills will help you earn the trust of the family faster. In the beginning, it will be difficult, but as you get better and better, your ability to convert the family from colluding to accepting gets better and better. Next slide. So once you have the family agreeing to talk that the patient should be informed, of course, I always tell the family, even though you are agreeable, I will tell the patient the information, the bad news, only if the patient wants to know. I will not tell if the patient does not want to know, even if the family is agreeable to it. So that is something that I always tell the family, that even though you are now okay with the idea of that the patient should be told the bad news, I will tell only if the patient wants to know. I will not tell if the patient does not want to. Despite your best efforts, it is possible that some families may not agree. They will still insist on colluding. And it is very difficult in that kind of situation, but we can then provide at least physical comfort to the patient. You may not be able to provide total care because you can't be totally honest with the patient. So, despite your best efforts, if the family is not agreeable, accept it. Do not push the family too much to accept your point of view. Because if you push beyond their comfort level, they will start pushing you back. And then that will create friction in your relationship with the family. That is why you must try. Trying and failing is perfectly acceptable. Not trying is not acceptable. So when you are dealing with collusion, try to manage collusion. It's possible that you may be able to convert the family into abandoning collusion and accepting the benefits of communicating bad news. It is also possible that the family may not uh, accept the importance of communicating bad news and will continue to collude. So if that is the situation, it is a little bit more difficult, but manageable. Next slide. So if you have any questions or queries on collusion, please send it in the chat box and we will talk about those in the end. The last topic is about anger. We often encounter anger in our clinical life, and that is the kind of anger we are going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about law and order problem. For example, there's a mob violence in the hospital. There's a group who's attacking us or getting very angry and trying to threaten the problem. If there is one or more than one people under the influence of alcohol or other substances, and then it is not possible to be reasonable with them. So that is a law and order problem. I'm not talking about dealing with law and order problem because we are healthcare providers. We are not law enforcement. We are not police or military. So leave that kind of situation to people who can deal with it, police or security or whatever. On our day-to-day basis, we encounter plenty of anger situations arriving at our doorstep, outside our OP, inside our IP, inside the ER, many times outside ICU. We often come across anger situation. So how to deal with it? First of all, we need to understand what is anger. Anger is a high energy consuming negative emotion. High energy is required to get angry and to sustain anger. You cannot do it in low energy. And of course, the reason behind it is emotional stress. Just like crime is a response to emotional stress, anger is also a response to emotional stress. So the person who is getting angry at you, you may not be the cause of that anger, but due to various reasons, the patient has been getting emotionally stressed. And then once the person loses control and gets bursts into anger, you are the one who was standing nearby and you get most of it. You can't be angry on a chair or a computer or a wall. You, so most of the time, as a healthcare provider, the one who gets the brunt of the anger may not be the cause of that. The cause of the anger can be multiple. The security person did not was rude or had to wait a long time in the reception, nobody bothered, etc. There could be hundreds of reasons why the person became stressed. And of course, members, loved one is in pain or in suffering. So that all adds up to stress. Next slide. So when the patient or family is angry, we have to facilitate anger to flow. So some body language instructions. When you see somebody getting angry, if you are sitting, you stand up, because most of the time when somebody is angry, they may not be sitting and getting angry, because when somebody is very angry, there is so much of adrenaline rush in the body, it is not possible to sit down. So most of the time, anger videos in hospital, people attacking hospital and things like that, you see people are all standing, they're not sitting somewhere and getting angry. So the moment you see somebody who is angry and you're seeing that they are standing and they have an aggressive posture, you also stand up. Basically, what you're doing, you're aligning your body position with the body position of the angry person. So you are creating equality. Why is that important? Because if you are sitting, your body language is demonstrating that you are superior to the person who is getting angry. Because you are sitting, that person is standing, it creates the hierarchy difference between body positions. And your body showing that I'm sitting shows that I am the boss, I am superior to you. And this can make the angry person more angry. So it is important to just immediately stand up so that your body is also standing and that person is also standing. So both bodies are standing, means both bodies are in the same position. So you are creating equality. Second thing, you have to stand in a respectful way. That is, if you are standing, you can close your hands in front of you, not cross across the chest, but below, and with a slight bend of the spine forward, not too much, just a slight, a mild kyphosis. So this, your body language is showing that you are respectful to the person. And when you are showing this, you are telling the person that I am not a threat to you. You don't have to be afraid of me. Because if you have a threatening body language, then that will make the person more angry. So your respectful body language will reduce the anger. So body position, same, respectful way of standing, and a confident eye contact. Because confident eye contact tells the person that you are not afraid. So it's very difficult to get angry with a confident person, right? So now you're showing equality and confidence. So these three aspects of the body language is very important to control anger. Anything. You stand in that position and whatever the person is saying, you can shake your head in up and down by maintaining eye contact. But don't say anything. This body posture or this body language of equality, respect, and confidence, and agreeing agreement with whatever the person is saying will facilitate the anger to flow. Will facilitate the anger to flow because you are not giving anything for the anger. Remember, it needs high energy. You are not giving any energy to the patient, any negative energy to the angry person, and it becomes very difficult to sustain high anger when you are giving positive energy. And as a result, this high anger cannot be sustained, and very quickly the high anger comes down. That does not mean the anger goes away totally, but it from high flame it becomes a sim. At this point of time, you can tell the person, I want to know more about this. Can we sit and talk? This is the stage where you invite the person to sit down. You do not ask the person to sit down in the beginning when there is high anger. When the high anger comes down, then you tell the person, I want to know more about this. Can we sit down and talk about this? It is like that Pepsi ad, give me more. You're telling the person, I want more, right? So you tell the person to sit down, and once a person sit down, then you start listening. You know, all the techniques we talked about in the previous session also, active listening. You engage in active listening and allow the person to ventilate more and more of the emotion, allow the person to talk. The more the person talks, the more the ventilation of emotion happens, and finally most of the anger can be drained away. If there are any genuine grievances and you have some solutions for it, do provide solutions. If there is a genuineness of the anger, and if you think that an apology is appropriate, you can apologize. But do not apologize just for the sake of apologizing, because that can make some people angry. Apology has to be genuine. It cannot be just because somebody got angry, you said, so I'm so sorry. No. If there is a genuine reason and you think that an apology is appropriate, only then apologize. Otherwise, no need to apologize. But if required, do apologize. If there is a solution to the grievances, do give the solution. If there is no solution, if it is circumstances are like that, it is nobody's fault, but the person felt very stressed out and got angry, just listening and allowing the ventilation of emotion. That is why we always say active listening is a therapy. When you allow people to ventilate emotion, you heal them. You heal them of emotional pain. You heal them of anger. So that is how we go about it. Next slide. Next slide. And the last slide is about what if you are angry? You're also a human being. You can get angry. The problem is, as healthcare providers, if in our professional environment we get angry, we can create a lot of difficulties for ourselves. We can create difficulties with our colleagues, our seniors, our juniors. We can get difficulties with the family. We can have difficulties with patients if we are displaying anger. So it is very important that we are aware that we are also stressed out and we can also be angry. The best thing is you arrange a friend or your colleague to spot signs of anger. If your voice is becoming high pitched, if your comments are becoming very sarcastic, if the words you're using are slowly getting a little angry, and it is the job of your friend as the spotter or your colleague as a spotter to come and tell you, hey, I think you are getting angry. And that is the time you will be able to check yourself. Am I getting angry? And that is the only way to prevent you getting angry out of control. Before it gets out of control, your spotter comes and tells you also be the spotter to your colleague or your friend. So it is like a buddy system. One a buddy pair will take care of each other and spot out if another person is getting stressed and tell and go and tell Are you feeling stressed? You seem little irritated. You seem little angry. So that way, when somebody tells you that your body language is changing, your voice is becoming high pitched, your words you're using seems to be angry. Are you angry? That way, you will be able to check yourself and not get anger overtake. Next slide, please. I think we are done. So in case there are any questions, any comments, everything, then it's good time to talk right now. We have 10 minutes. I hope most of the questions that Sister Clarita had posed during her case presentation uh, have been answered. In case Sister Clarita would want to ask any question, or if anybody else wants to ask any questions, or if there are any questions on the chat box, we can talk about that. Thank you. If anybody wants to ask a question, they can unmute their mic and ask a question, or they can type in the chat box.
Hello.
Yes, Sister Shilby, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you very much, sir, for the wonderful presentation. So I was wondering if in a family, like if different family members has different opinion about passing the information to the patient, to their loved ones, what will we do? Like one person say yes, yeah, it will be okay for my dad to hear it, and then the other person say like, no, I don't think it is not appropriate to do it. So what will we do in that situation?
That happens very often, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I usually do is that I call a family conference. Before COVID, I used to tell the family that all people who are who have a say in this patient's matter, please come and meet me tomorrow at so and so time. And though I have a small room, a standard room like most doctor's room in a hospital, I have my chair, one patient's chair, and two chairs in front. I also make sure that I have plenty of plastic chairs stacked on top of each other, so that easily around 10 to 13, 14 people can be accommodated at the same time in my room. The advantage with that is everybody gets a chance to assemble at the same time and listen to what I have to tell them about the patient's diagnosis and prognosis. So everybody hears it at the same time. It also gives a chance for family members with different opinion to view or to express their point of view, whether it is right to say or not to say. Many a times a family discussion happens right in front of me. I don't have to make much of an effort. Usually they come to a discussion. Sometimes I guide them with some points, and ultimately I help them come to a decision by consensus. Mostly I kind of guide them. I'm not telling them what to do, what not to do. The difference of opinions are kind of taken care of, and everybody listens to what are the points and counterpoints is being happening. So everybody is on the same page. So everybody knows what all points came up and did not come up. After all the discussions over, I always ask, as is my usual practice, is there anything else? Does anybody else have any question? So that is the way I conduct a family discussion, family counseling session, so that we can all come to some kind of an understanding based on that. In the COVID era, now that physical this thing is now not possible for obvious reasons. But now, basically, I'm resorting to basically WhatsApp video chats and sometimes telemedicine video chat. Our hospital, fortunately for me, has an excellent telemedicine unit. So sometimes I'm talking to children of a patient about how to proceed. So one person is in USA, another person is in Dubai, one person is Bangalore, and another person maybe somewhere else. So we are all at different parts of the world. We are having a counseling session online, so to speak. So just trying to manage. Somehow it's much more difficult not having a physical meeting and a virtual meeting, but somehow we are trying to adapt according to time. It's not easy, but it is doable, managing different opinions. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's wonderful, sir. I have one more thing to ask. So do we get permission from the patient himself before having the meeting, or is it just we just conduct it with the family?
Since I work in India, in Kerala, so our ethos or our cultural reality is that it is the family which brings the patient to us. In Western countries, it's the patient which comes to the healthcare system. In our system, it is the family which brings the patient to us. And the family's right over the patient is much more than patient's right over himself or herself. Patient autonomy is secondary to the family's right over the patient. As a result, we have no doubt we have to talk to the family, take their permission before we talk to the patient. In our cultural system, that is how it works.
That's really good to know. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Most welcome. Anybody else would like to make a comment? It need not be only a question. Somebody can
Sir, there
share
are,
their yes, please.
sir, there is a chat from Sister Clarita that is, why do we get angry for even silly matter? And when we say about the bad news to the patient, even by using our skills, still patient will not be happy about the disease. In that case, what can we do?
The first part, why do we get angry over silly matters? Because when we are stressed out, even silly matters irritates us. And that is why we get angry over silly matters. And this is something that we need to understand. Emotional stress is a reality. And even if we are not in the healthcare area, non-medical people are having stress over everything. In healthcare, we are burdened because we are dealing with situations of life and death. We see so much of human misery on a daily basis. So naturally, those professions which are dealing with high stress compared to other professions which are low stress, when we are in a high stress profession, it is all the more we are vulnerable to burnout and stress related outpouring, usually anger, interpersonal relations problems. That is why it's very important to do self care, take care of yourself so that you can take better care of others. Until unless you don't take care of yourself and you deteriorate, how are you going to take care of others? What was the second question that came up in the chat box from the same person? The second part?
Sir, when we say about the bad news or bad news to the patient, even by using our skills, still patient will not be happy about the disease. In that
Oh,
case,
yeah,
what
there
we
is.
can,
Thank you. Yeah. There's nothing to be happy about, right? After you hear a bad news, you don't expect a person to be happy at all. That is fine. That is okay. Because when you hear a bad news, it is normal for the person who hears the bad news to feel bad. That is why it is called bad news, right? The person will have a very negative emotional reaction. The person will cry. The person will maybe get angry. Why nobody told this to me earlier? The patient may sit in stunned silence. All of these things will happen. Hearing a bad news cannot be a happy occasion. Now, the skill that we have to use is allowing the patient to ventilate the emotion that comes as a reaction to the bad news. You can't expect anybody to be happy by hearing a bad news. It is not a happy news, it is a bad news, right? I hope I have answered that question. Thank you, Sister Late. Any other any other questions or comments? Or if somebody would like to share experience, anything. We have some more. How much time do we have? I think about another minute or two.
yes, sir. If anyone having any questions, he can extend for 5 to 10 minutes. No problem, sir.
Yeah, because we started little late, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, right.
Sir, what about the case presentation discussion points?
That's what I think we covered.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
In case there are anything else to be covered, we can. Well, I remember there were two or three things. One was how will we communicate bad news, and another was how are we going to manage collusion. Yeah. So last was, and how to give emotional support to the patient's family. I think we have covered all of that.
Yes. Only the third one is pending. I think if anybody having any
That's the
experience.
third one. Any similar story, bad news, or yeah. In case somebody has any personal or professional stories from your side. Yeah. Thank you. My pleasure.
I think, sir, they're not having any other stories. I think.
Okay, so let us finish the story from today's program.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, thank you,
So
sir.
thank you for being around, and thank you for the active participation. It's been a pleasure. We did the first part long time back, I think first week of this month, and now we are doing it in the second part in the third week of this month. It's been a pleasure and great meeting all of you online. So hopefully when Palem India conducts some other program in future, we may have an opportunity to meet again. That is bye from my end.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sister Clinton. And we already shared the feedback link. Please do it now. It's a request.
All right. I'll request to be spared. I think I'll leave the meeting now. Bye everybody. Best of luck to everybody.